Danger might be closer than you think. Before we begin, like this video, comment where and what time you're watching from, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the unknown. I'm not usually the type of person who shares stuff like this, but what happened to me and Josh last fall has been stuck in my head ever since. I've told a few close friends, but they always give me that polite, "You're overreacting" smile. So I figured I'd post it here. Maybe someone's experienced something similar. We had both been working remote for over a year, super burned out, and decided to take a weekend off-grid. We found a small private spot in rural West Virginia through one of those camping apps. It had good reviews, a few user photos of a stream and fire pit, and supposedly great privacy. That part wasn't a lie. We picked up the rented RV on a Friday morning, packed light, just enough food, gear, and some beers, and made the drive. The place was about 3 hours from where we live. Cell service dropped off about 30 minutes before we got there, but we had downloaded the directions, so we were fine. The road leading up to the site was rough, full of potholes and overgrown branches. The weirdest thing was that we didn't see a single other car the entire time, not even a parked one. It was like nobody used that road except the guy who listed the site. The clearing itself was nice though, pretty much how it looked in the app. Big enough for the RV, surrounded by dense trees, and yeah, it was quiet. Almost too quiet. We set up camp, grilled some food, and just chilled for a while. Josh was messing with his drone, getting some shots of the woods while I kicked back in a folding chair with a beer. Around late afternoon, we noticed a trail right behind the tree line. Not marked or anything, just a narrow path like someone, or something, had walked through repeatedly. Josh wanted to explore it the next morning, but something about it gave me a bad feeling. It wasn't just a spooky woods vibe. It was like we weren't supposed to be back there. I tried to brush it off. We were surrounded by nature. Of course there would be random trails, right? That night after the fire had burned down and we'd gone inside the RV, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to what sounded like metal tapping. I thought maybe Josh was up, but he was knocked out cold in the bunk above me. I stayed still and just listened. There it was again, 3 slow taps like something hard knocking on the side of the RV. Not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. I didn't want to move. My body was tense, ears straining for any other noise. Then came the crunching of leaves, light, footsteps circling us. I grabbed my phone out of instinct, but remembered we had no signal. I just laid there, holding my breath, heart pounding in my throat. Eventually, the sound stopped. I must have laid there frozen for at least 20 minutes before I even dared to peek through the window above the kitchenette. It was pitch black outside, no moon, just trees and shadows. But right before I gave up and went back to my bunk, I saw something. It was faint, just a glimmer of something metallic, like a reflection, maybe a lens. It was gone in a second, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. I thought maybe it was a trail cam or something left by another camper, but it was pointed directly at us, and it hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of that. The next morning I tried to tell Josh about it, but he just laughed it off and said I probably imagined it. I let it go. We spent the morning hiking the nearby trail and took some pictures, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept catching these little signs, like snapped branches that looked too fresh, or patches of dirt that had clearly been disturbed. At one point, I swear I saw footprints in the mud that didn't match either of our boots. They were wider, flatter, almost like someone had walked barefoot. I took a photo, but later when I checked, it was just a blurry mess. When we got back to the RV that afternoon, Josh noticed something weird. One of the folding chairs was moved. Not far, just a few feet away from where we left it, facing the woods. Neither of us remembered moving it. There weren't any animals around that could have done that, at least not in a way that made sense. We laughed it off nervously, but I know both of us were starting to feel uneasy. That night, we agreed to lock up early and keep the fire going low, just in case. We didn't say it out loud, but there was definitely a shift in the vibe. Around midnight, I woke up again. No tapping this time, just silence. The kind of silence that feels too quiet. I sat up and looked around. Josh was already awake, sitting up in his bunk with his back against the wall, eyes wide. He mouthed something to me and pointed at the back window. I crawled over and looked. There was a figure standing there, not moving, just standing a few feet from the RV facing us. No flashlight, no movement, just still. I couldn't see their face, just the outline. They didn't try to come closer, didn't knock, didn't run. They just stood. They're like they were waiting for something. I don't know how long we sat there watching it. At some point, Josh whispered that we should turn off all the lights and stay low. I agreed. We sat there in the dark, trying not to make any sound. My mind was racing. Was it just some crazy hiker, a hunter? But who the hell stands motionless in the middle of the woods at midnight like that? After maybe 10 minutes, I finally looked again. The figure was gone. No sound, no footsteps, nothing. It was like it'd never been there. But I know what I saw. Josh saw it too. We didn't sleep after that, we just waited for the sun to come up. As soon as there was light, we packed everything and got out of there. We didn't eat, didn't even talk much, just drove. About 15 minutes down the road, we passed a tree with something nailed to it. A trail cam, just like the one I thought I saw the night before, aimed directly at the road. It felt deliberate. We didn't stop to check it, just kept going until we got back into range and could use our phones again. I called the campsite owner listed in the app and told him we had left early. He just said, "Hope everything was all right," like he'd heard it before. That stuck with me. A week later, I got curious and went back on the app to see if anyone else had posted reviews. The listing was gone, like it had never been there. I checked my email for the receipt. Nothing. No confirmation, no record of the reservation, nothing from the owner. It was like the whole thing had been wiped clean. Josh told me to let it go, that we got out fine, and that's what matters. But I can't stop thinking about that figure, the trail, the camera, the silence, the way it all felt planned, like we were led there. I still think about that night all the time. Sometimes I'll be driving late at night and see something by the side of the road, and my stomach just knots up instantly. We never went camping again. I don't even like walking alone in the woods anymore. Something about that trip wasn't right. It wasn't just some stranger creeping around. Whoever that was, they knew we were coming. They had been watching us the whole time. And the worst part is, they didn't do anything. They didn't need to. They just let us know they were there. And that was enough. Story 2. I don't talk much about what happened to Dylan. Part of me still thinks maybe I did something wrong. Like there's some part of the night I messed up and just can't remember right. But the more I've tried to piece it together, the more it feels like the holes aren't in my memory. They're in reality. We were best friends growing up. Did everything together. High school, first jobs, bad breakups. After a few years apart, we reconnected and planned a camping trip like old times. He had just gotten back from Colorado. I'd been stuck in a dead-end office job for too long. We needed a reset. So we rented an RV and picked a spot in Monongahela. Quiet, remote, nothing too extreme. Just trees, beer, and catching up. We got there in the early afternoon, parked in a nice open patch maybe 50 yards off the main trail. No cell signal, but we expected that. We weren't totally off-grid. We had the GPS, backup batteries, and some basic emergency gear. The plan was simple: 2 nights, light hiking, maybe fish a bit if we found water. First night was fine. We built a fire, cracked some beers, talked for hours. At one point, Dylan said it felt too quiet. I joked that he was just used to city noise, but if I'm being honest, I'd noticed it too. No bugs, no rustling, not even birds. Just this thick, unnatural kind of stillness, like the woods were listening. It was sometime after midnight when we heard the scream. Far off, but not too far. High-pitched, human, but distorted. Like someone was trying to scream with their mouth half covered. We both froze. It only lasted a second or two, then nothing. Dylan looked at me and said, "That didn't sound right." I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. He grabbed the flashlight and said we should check it out, but I said no. It wasn't our business. We're not park rangers. But he was already putting on his boots. "Just to the tree line," he said. "If it's nothing, we come back." I didn't follow him. That's the part I keep replaying in my head. He walked into the trees and never came back. I waited by the fire for maybe 15 minutes, calling his name every few minutes. At first I thought maybe he was messing with me, trying to scare me like we used to when we were kids. But Dylan was older now. He didn't pull dumb crap like that anymore. After half an hour, I started to panic. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the path I saw him take. I walked maybe 10 minutes into the woods, yelling, listening, nothing. I couldn't even hear my own echo. It felt like the forest was absorbing sound. No broken branches, no footsteps, no signs anyone had ever walked that way. Eventually, I turned back. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the trees were closing in the deeper I went, like they didn't want me there either. When I got back to the RV, I stayed up the rest of the night, just sitting there with the door locked, holding a kitchen knife. I didn't sleep at all. At first light, I started hiking toward the main trail to try and get a signal. After about an hour, I finally got one bar and called 911. The ranger met me later that morning, and I told him everything. They searched the area with dogs, drones, volunteers. Nothing. Not a single trace of Dylan, not a shoe, not a shirt, not a footprint. Just gone. The weirdest part was when they asked me for my phone and GPS logs. I let them download the data and they said something didn't make sense. Apparently there were no movement records for Dylan at all. Not even when we walked in from the car. It was like only I had ever been there. I know how that sounds. I swear I'm not crazy. I even pulled up some photos I took with him earlier that day selfies, shots of the trail, of our beers by the fire, but some of them were blurry, like the camera couldn't focus. And in one photo, the one I took right before sunset, Dylan's face looks off, like the shape of his head is just slightly wrong. I didn't notice it at the time, but once I saw it again, I couldn't unsee it. It looked like a bad Photoshop job, except I was the one who took it. The park officials never followed up, said they'd keep the file open but eventually stopped answering my emails. It felt like everyone just wanted to forget it ever happened. I still have his number saved. Still scroll past it in my contacts and think maybe I should call, just in case. I haven't gone camping since. I've barely left town. Sometimes I get these weird notifications on my phone, just blank messages from an unknown number with no sender info, always at 2:17 a.m., the exact time I last saw him walk into those trees. I don't know what happened out there. I don't know if it was something natural or not, but whatever took Dylan, it didn't leave a trace, and somehow, it made it look like he was never even there. Story 3. This happened about 6 months ago, but I still think about it almost every night. My younger brother Caleb and I had started this little tradition of taking short RV trips once every couple of months, mostly just to get away from the city, clear our heads. We were close, always had been. He was the impulsive one, the kind of guy who would take a detour just because a sign looked sketchy, while I was more careful. We both had that weekend free, so we rented a small RV and headed to a state-managed site in the Allegheny Mountains. Pretty remote, but still public land. The kind of place with a fire ring and a pit toilet, but no rangers on site. We arrived Friday afternoon and went straight for the trail we'd planned to hike. It was beautiful, quiet, almost too quiet. We were out for about 3 hours. Didn't see a single person the whole time, which was unusual for a Friday. When we got back to the RV, the first thing I noticed was the side door wasn't fully shut. I was 100% sure I'd locked it. Caleb had triple-checked it himself. Nothing looked obviously damaged, no scratches, no pry marks. But when we stepped inside, we realized something had been moved. Our packs were unzipped and rummaged through. Our food was untouched. Electronics were still there. But our boots, both pairs, were gone. That was it. Everything else was still there. Even Caleb's wallet and my car keys just sitting there on the table. We both kind of laughed at first, thinking maybe it was some dumb prank. But then we noticed the prints, just outside the RV, leading toward the woods. Barefoot prints. Wide, flat, deep in the dirt like whoever it was had been standing there a while. The thing is, they weren't adult-sized. They looked like a child's, but spaced like an adult's stride, and sunk so deep into the mud that whoever it was had to be heavy. We followed them a few feet into the trees before they faded out. Caleb thought maybe it was some weird animal or someone walking barefoot as a joke. He said he was going to follow the direction the prints were heading, just to see if someone ditched our boots in the woods or something. I told him to wait and let it go until morning. He didn't listen. I watched him disappear into the tree line barefoot, holding a flashlight. I stayed near the RV, still shaken but trying to keep calm. After about 15 minutes, I shouted his name. No answer. 20 more minutes passed. Still nothing. I called out again and again. I kept thinking he'd pop out laughing, boots in hand, like it was all some dumb story to tell later. But he never came back. I waited over an hour before I finally grabbed a second flashlight and tried to go after him. I barely made it 100 feet into the woods before I got this sick feeling in my gut, like I was being watched from every direction at once. I turned around and went straight back to the RV. I stayed up the entire night sitting in the driver's seat, flashlight in hand, engine running. I kept the lights off so I wouldn't draw attention, but I couldn't bring myself to drive away. I kept thinking Caleb would show up, maybe limping, maybe laughing, maybe pissed off, but he didn't. I called 911 the second I had a signal, which wasn't until the next morning when I drove about 20 minutes down the road. The dispatcher took it seriously. A few hours later, search and rescue arrived. They brought dogs, drones, the whole deal. I showed them the prints, the photos I took, everything. They searched for 3 days. Not a single sign of him. No boots, no flashlight, no clothing, no blood. Just nothing. When the police took my statement, they were polite but skeptical. I could tell by the way they asked the same questions over and over. "You're sure he went into the woods barefoot?" "Yes." "You didn't see anyone else?" "No." I even offered to hand over my phone and GPS history. Later, when I asked the lead investigator what they found, he just said there were inconsistencies in the GPS data, like Caleb's movement stopped instantly. No slow wandering, no signal fading, just a hard stop. They asked if he had any history of mental health issues or a reason to run away. He didn't. We were planning another trip 2 weeks later. He'd even Venmo'd me for gas the day before we left. I don't talk to my parents about it much. They couldn't handle the idea that something unnatural happened. They believe he got lost, maybe fell, maybe someone found him and did something horrible. That'd be bad enough. But I've gone over every detail in my head 100 times, and none of it adds up. Not the missing boots, not the childlike footprints, not the way the prints vanished without leading anywhere, and definitely not the fact that Caleb's phone location data just ends. I stayed off Reddit and forums for months, but eventually I found some threads with stories that sound too similar. People disappearing in forests without a trace, weird prints, electronic interference. It doesn't make me feel better. It just makes it harder to sleep. Every so often, I dream that Caleb is standing outside the RV, barefoot, not saying anything, just looking at me. The last time it happened, I woke up with my window cracked open. I live on the 2nd floor. I know how that sounds, but I swear I locked it, and I swear I closed it all the way. Nothing was missing. Just a small patch of dirt on the floor, like someone stepped inside and then left. I haven't told anyone that part. I keep hoping it was just a dream, but a part of me knows it wasn't. And the worst part? The boots were never found. Not his. Not mine. Story 4. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to take a solo RV trip, but after the divorce, everything felt heavy. The apartment was too quiet, the routine too predictable. I needed to get out, even if just for a few days. So I booked a 3-night rental on a small RV and headed out to a quiet state park in Virginia. Nothing fancy, just a basic lot with some trees, no hookups, barely any traffic. I didn't want an adventure, I just wanted silence. I brought a few books, a cooler, and my camera. I planned to hike a little, cook over a fire, and try to clear my head. I got there on a Thursday afternoon. Weather was perfect. I remember thinking I should have done this years ago. The spot I picked was tucked in a loop off the main road. There were other lots, but most were empty. The nearest RV was maybe a quarter-mile away. By sunset, I was fully set up. I made some food, cracked a beer, and read until it got too dark. The woods around me were quiet, no animals, no wind, just that dense kind of stillness that only exists in the middle of nowhere. I went to bed a little after 10, windows cracked for airflow. The temperature dropped fast, but I slept fine until around 2 a.m., when something woke me up. At first, I thought it was a branch hitting the side of the RV. Then I heard it again, 3 slow taps. Not hard, just deliberate. Metal on metal. Then silence. I laid there, frozen, listening. No footsteps, no voices. Just those 3 taps. I turned on a small lantern and waited. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably a tree limb or an animal brushing past. But the way it tapped, it didn't feel like random noise. It felt intentional. The next morning, I walked around the RV and checked for damage. Nothing obvious. A few smudges on the back window, but nothing serious. I let it go, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That afternoon, I remembered I had a spare Dashcam in the glove box. I mounted it on the front dash and made sure it would record overnight. The second night, I stayed up later, half hoping to hear something again. But it was quiet. Too quiet. No wind. No night sounds. I eventually fell asleep, but it was restless. I woke up a few times for no reason at all. Just this weird sense that something was off. In the morning, I brewed some coffee and pulled the Dashcam's SD card, just to check. I scrolled through about 3 hours of darkness, fast-forwarding until I saw movement at 3:11 a.m. A shape, tall, thin, steps into view from the left side of the frame. Not walking, just appearing. The figure stands about 20 feet in front of the RV. No light, no movement, just standing, watching, for nearly 2 full hours. The longer I watched the footage, the worse the feeling in my gut got. The figure never moved. It didn't pace, didn't shift weight, didn't even sway like a person would if they were standing still for that long. It just stood there, completely rigid. I zoomed in, but the Dashcam quality wasn't great. No clear face, just a silhouette. It looked like it might have been wearing a hoodie or maybe a jacket with the hood up, but I couldn't tell for sure. And then at exactly 5:06 a.m., it was just gone. Not walked away, not faded, just vanished between frames. I replayed it 5 times to make sure it wasn't a glitch. It was like someone had paused time, removed the figure, and hit play again. I stepped outside that morning and walked over to where the figure had stood. The ground was covered in dry leaves and loose dirt. No footprints, no drag marks, no broken branches or disturbed soil. It was like nobody had been there. I kept telling myself it had to be some camper playing a prank, or maybe a sleepwalker from another. But there were only 2 other vehicles in the entire park, and both had left by 8 a.m., according to the ranger I spoke with. I asked if they had any security cams, but they just laughed and said, "Not out here." No one else reported anything weird. That night I didn't sleep. I locked the RV tight, covered the windows, and kept the lights off. Every time I heard a sound, I flinched. I didn't check the Dashcam again. I didn't want to know if it came back. First thing the next morning, I packed up and left without even finishing breakfast. On the way home, I stopped at a gas station with Wi-Fi and uploaded the footage to a private drive. I haven't watched it since. I've thought about deleting it, but a part of me needs proof, something to remind me I'm not crazy. Something was out there, and it saw me. I haven't taken the RV out again. It's still sitting in storage. I moved into a smaller place, closer to the city. More streetlights, more neighbors. I keep a camera at my front. Do you or now and check it every night before bed. Nothing unusual, yet. But sometimes, around 3 in the morning, I wake up for no reason. I lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, waiting for a knock, listening for that sound. 3 slow taps like someone letting me know they're still watching. Story 5. My friend Max and I had this habit of picking camping spots nobody else knew about. We'd been doing it since college, finding hidden trails, abandoned buildings, stuff like that. Last August, we rented an RV and headed out to northern Pennsylvania, near the Allegheny National Forest. Max had heard about this unmarked trail off some random blog post. It supposedly led to some old ruins or abandoned cabins. Nothing spooky, just cool stuff to check out. We parked the RV at a small clearing, completely isolated, miles from the nearest main road. It felt like we were the only 2 people for 100 miles. At first, we loved it. On our second day there, we went hiking, deeper into the woods. After about an hour, Max spotted something through the trees. At first, I thought it was just rocks or some leftover foundation. But when we got closer, we realized it was an old stone well. It was covered with moss and leaves, and the top was sealed with a heavy wooden lid and a rusted padlock. I joked that someone obviously didn't want whatever was in there getting out, but Max was immediately curious. He found a sturdy branch and managed to pry the old wood apart. The lock snapped easier than I expected, which made me feel even more uneasy. but Max was already shining his flashlight down inside. Inside the well, about 10 feet down, we could see something small and reflective. Max insisted on climbing down, using some roots and rocks sticking out of the wall. I told him it wasn't worth the risk, but he ignored me and went anyway. A couple of minutes later, he climbed back up holding an old, dusty digital camera. It looked like it had been down there for years, covered in dirt and grime, but somehow still intact. It was dead, obviously, but Max was convinced we could salvage the SD card. Honestly, at that point, I just wanted to leave it behind, but Max was excited, so I played along. Back at the RV, we managed to get the SD card out. It was dirty, but didn't look damaged. Max had his laptop, so he popped it in and started going through the files. Most photos were corrupted or unreadable. But then we came across a folder labeled with a date from 5 years earlier. Inside were about 30 clear photos of an RV. Our RV. Same rental decals, same campsite, everything identical. My stomach turned when we clicked through the pictures and saw ourselves sleeping inside the RV. The angles were impossible, like whoever took them had been standing inches from us right by our bunks. We didn't recognize these photos. Neither of us remembered anyone taking them. Max tried to rationalize it right away. Maybe someone else had rented the same RV before us. Maybe the photos were taken at the same site, just with different people who looked like us. But I knew he didn't believe it. You could see it in his face. His hands were shaking. One photo showed Max's tattoo, the one he only got last year. Another showed my phone sitting on the fold-out table beside me, screen lit, showing a message I remembered sending that exact night. These weren't old photos. They were from last night. That meant someone had been inside our RV while we were sleeping. Neither of us heard a thing. We tore through the RV, checking the doors, windows, everything. Nothing was broken, nothing forced. We even checked the Dashcam, but it had stopped recording at midnight for some reason and didn't resume until after sunrise. There were no signs of forced entry, but the memory of those photos kept playing in my head. Someone standing inches from my face while I slept, and I never knew. We decided right then to leave, packed everything in 15 minutes and drove non-stop back toward civilization. The entire ride, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting up in the back seat. A few days later, Max tried to show the photos to someone at the rental company, but the card wouldn't read anymore. It was like the data had corrupted overnight. We still had the camera, but the SD slot was busted, and no tech we brought it to could recover anything from it. Every time we tried, the files either disappeared or came out as blank. Max stopped bringing it up after a while, but I could tell it still haunted him. He got rid of his laptop not long after that. Said he didn't want to risk seeing those images again. I couldn't blame him. I haven't slept a full night since. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced I heard the RV door clicking open, even though I'm back in my apartment. I check every room, every lock, every window. Everything's always in place. But I can't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was standing over us that night knew us. Not just our faces or our names, but how to find us, how to get inside. And if they were that close once without us knowing, what's stopping them from doing it again? Story 6. I've been doing wildlife photography for almost 10 years, and I've seen a lot of weird stuff, but nothing ever made me pack up early, until that weekend last fall. I'd driven up to a spot just outside the Ottawa National Forest in Michigan. It's this quiet place, deep in the woods. No cell reception, no light pollution, just pure nature. Perfect for photographing owls and foxes. I was alone, like always. Brought my small RV, my gear, and 3 trail cams to set up around the site. I got there on a Friday afternoon, set up camp, and placed the cameras facing the woods, the trail, and one angled toward the RV itself, mostly for security, not wildlife. That night was uneventful at first. I cooked, reviewed some shots from earlier trips, and crashed early. Around 3:30 as I woke up to this weird dragging noise, like someone slowly pulling something heavy along the gravel outside. It circled the RV once, then again, then stopped right by the back corner. I didn't hear footsteps, just the dragging sound and then nothing. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, but didn't look outside. I don't know why. I guess I was afraid of seeing something I wouldn't be able to explain. Eventually, the silence took over, and after about an hour I managed to fall asleep again. I told myself it was just an animal. The next morning I went outside and checked around the RV. That's when I saw the scratches. 3 long gouges, deep enough to dent the metal, running diagonally across the back panel near the window. They weren't from a branch or rock, I would have heard that. These were wide, deep, and clean, like someone dragged steel claws across the surface. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, just those marks. I felt sick to my stomach. I don't scare easy, but this felt intentional. I checked my trail cams immediately. One had a dead battery, another didn't trigger at all. The third, facing the RV, had recorded something. I loaded the footage onto my laptop and scrubbed through the night. Nothing until 3:02 a.m. Then the motion trigger caught it. A figure, tall and lean, walking slowly around the RV. It didn't use a flashlight, just moved in total darkness like it knew the area. At one point, it walked right up to the back of the RV and stood there, completely still for at least a minute. Then it did something that still makes my skin crawl. It leaned forward and pressed its face against the window. You could see the outline of the head, the breath fogging the glass, and then it just stayed there, watching. I paused the footage and zoomed in as much as I could, but the resolution wasn't great. Still, you could make out the shape of a face, nose, mouth, eyes. The eyes were the worst part. They didn't reflect any light. They were just dark. I couldn't see pupils, whites, nothing. Just 2 black voids staring through the glass. It didn't knock, didn't try to open the door. It just stared. After about a minute, it backed away slowly, turned, and walked off into the woods like it hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. That was it. I checked the footage from the other cams again. Nothing. Just that one clip. I didn't even bother packing up properly. I grabbed my gear, left the cameras, and got the hell out of there by noon. I drove 6 hours straight without stopping, constantly checking my mirrors. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't. My mind kept replaying that image. Someone or something pressing its face against the glass, watching me sleep just feet away. I told myself maybe it was just some drifter, some creep who found my camp and decided to screw with me. But those scratches, they weren't from a knife. They were too deep, too wide. I haven't been able to explain them. When I got home, I checked the RV's exterior again. The scratches were still there, but something else was too. Above the back window in the dirt and dust, someone had written something with their finger. Just one word. Still. I didn't notice it at first because of how subtle it was, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I tried scrubbing it off, but the pressure only made it more visible. I eventually replaced the panel altogether. Still have it stored in my garage. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe part of me still needs to prove it wasn't in my head. I haven't been back to that forest since. I still photograph wildlife, but I only go to places with people nearby now. Rangers, campers, cell service, and I always lock every single door and window no matter how safe it feels. But sometimes in the middle of the night I swear I hear it again. That dragging sound. Not loud, just faint enough to make me freeze. Like something circling, waiting for me to forget. And I know if I ever go back to that kind of, isolation, it might find me again. Story 7. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend off-grid. My RV wasn't fancy, but it had always done the job, until that Friday afternoon. I was driving a back road through eastern Kentucky, trying to reach a small campsite near a hiking trail a coworker had recommended. Out of nowhere, the engine cut out. No cell signal, no cars in sight, and at least 6 miles left to go. I waited over 2 hours hoping someone would pass by. No one did, so I grabbed my pack and started walking. The dirt road felt like it hadn't been driven on in days. Overgrown, silent, not a single power line in sight. After about 40 minutes, I noticed a narrow path off to the right. I followed it and saw an old house tucked back in the trees. It looked forgotten. 2 stories, dark wood, a sagging porch but still intact. I called out, and eventually an older woman stepped out from behind the screen door. She looked like someone's grandmother. Gray hair, long floral dress, soft voice. I explained my situation and asked if she had a phone I could use. She told me she hadn't had one in years, but I was welcome to come in, get some water, maybe rest a while before moving on. I was tired, overheated, and out of options. I said yes. The inside of the house was strangely clean, not just tidy, sterile. Nothing out of place, no clutter, no smell. It felt like a set someone had staged, not a place someone actually lived in. She gave me a cup of tea and a bowl of something that tasted like soup but had an odd metallic aftertaste. I barely ate any of it. I tried to make small talk, asked if anyone else lived nearby. She just smiled and said, "Not anymore." When I asked about nearby towns or gas stations, she changed the subject. Said I could sleep in the back room and head out at first light. I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed. I woke up around 2 a.m., restless. Something felt off, like the air was too still. I got up quietly to grab some water, and as I passed the hallway, I noticed a door that had been closed earlier was now slightly open. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed it open and stepped inside. It was a small room, maybe an office. The desk was covered in newspaper clippings, dozens of them. As I looked closer, my chest tightened. They were all missing person reports. Hikers, campers, travelers, all from this region. Most were old, but a few were recent. And that's when I noticed the handwriting. Dates, locations, physical descriptions, written in neat, precise letters across every article. I backed out of that room as quietly as I could and returned to the guest room, but there was no chance I was going to sleep again. I just sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, listening. I kept expecting to hear footsteps, a creaking floorboard, something, but the house stayed eerily silent. At around 4 a.m., I heard something soft, almost like humming, coming from the hallway. I didn't dare open the door. I just stayed frozen, barely, breathing, waiting for it to stop. When it finally did, I sat in that same position until the sky started to lighten through the window. The moment there was enough daylight, I quietly slipped out of the room and made my way to the front door. The woman was in the kitchen. She turned when she heard me and gave me that same calm smile. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. I just nodded and mumbled something about getting the RV towed. She didn't stop me, didn't say goodbye, just watched me leave like she was waiting to see if I'd change my mind. I walked fast until I was out of sight of the house, then ran. I didn't stop until I was back at the RV. It still wouldn't start, but I had enough signal now to call for help. A tow truck arrived within a couple of hours. The driver asked where I'd spent the night, and when I told him about the house, he frowned. "There's no house out here," he said. "Not for miles." I pointed down the trail, but he shook his head. Said that used to be logging land, all cleared out decades ago. I tried to show him where it was, but the trail looked different, narrower, overgrown, almost like it hadn't been used in years. I haven't been able to find that place since. No coordinates, no property records, nothing. I've looked. I don't know if she was real or if the whole thing was something else entirely, but I still think about those clippings, those names, and I wonder how many more were never printed, never reported, just vanished. I've never told anyone this in person. I tried once, but they looked at me like I was losing it. Maybe I am, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. That house shouldn't exist. That woman shouldn't be there. And those files, those notes, she wasn't collecting them out of curiosity. She was tracking them. And I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night, if I hadn't left at first light. Sometimes I wake up and swear I can smell that metallic soup again, faint in the air. I keep my doors locked tight now, always. Story 8. I'd been on the edge of burnout for months. Long hours, endless Zoom calls, barely any sleep. I work in tech, back-end systems, nothing flashy, and I needed a break before I snapped. So I took 2 weeks off, rented a small RV, and headed up to a quiet spot in Vermont. I didn't want campgrounds with hookups or neighbors. I found this patch of public land through a small forum for solo campers, accessible by a dirt road next to a creek, barely on the map. It sounded perfect. When I got there, it felt like peace for the first time in forever. No notifications, no meetings, just the sound of water and wind through the trees. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. I hiked, cooked over the fire, read old paperbacks. I slept better than I had in years, but by the third morning, little things started to feel wrong. My camp chair was slightly out of place. A bundle of firewood I swear I stacked neatly was just gone. My mug, something I always left on the small table next to the bed, was inside the sink. It was subtle stuff, easy to brush off. I assumed I was just distracted or tired, maybe moving things without realizing. But it kept happening. And then I saw the tire marks. There were 2 fresh tracks in the dirt just behind my RV. Clean, tight turns like someone had backed in and left. I would have heard an engine. I always woke at the slightest sound. But I slept through whatever, or whoever, was there. That was when I started to feel paranoid. I went into town the next morning and bought 2 motion sensor lights. Mounted them on opposite sides of the RV, pointing out toward the trees. I also added a lock bar inside the door, just in case. I didn't tell anyone what was going on. I just kept hoping it was nothing. But I left the lights on every night after that. On the 5th night, one of the lights clicked on around 4 a.m. I was already half awake, lying still in my bunk. I didn't move. I just listened. At first, nothing. Then I heard the crunch of leaves. Slow, steady steps coming closer. I grabbed my phone and looked at the time. 4:12 a.m. The steps stopped. Then I heard the faintest click, like metal against metal. I sat up slowly, heart hammering, and looked out the narrow window by the door. There was a man standing just outside, back to the woods, one hand on the door handle. He was wearing what looked like a sheriff's jacket, but there was no badge, no name, no radio, no car. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself, just stood there with his hand on the handle like he was testing it, slowly turning it back and forth. I stayed completely still. The light above him was dim, but bright enough for me to see his face. He wasn't wearing a uniform under the jacket, just a black hoodie and jeans. His eyes were fixed on the door, not looking around like someone lost or confused. He knew where he was, and he wasn't trying to get help. He was trying to get in. I grabbed the wrench I kept near my bed and waited. After what felt like forever, he let go of the handle, turned, and walked straight back into the woods. I didn't sleep after that, just sat there in the dark, waiting to hear if he came back. The motion light clicked off after a few minutes. I kept checking the window every few seconds, but he never reappeared. As soon as the sun started coming up, I packed everything, fast. Didn't eat, didn't clean up, just threw stuff into bags and got in the driver's seat. Before I pulled out, I checked the dirt around the RV. More tracks. Same tread as before, but this time closer. Right up against the door, like he'd backed in again, waited for the lights to go off, and walked the rest of the way on foot. I went straight to the ranger station in the nearest town and told them what happened. The ranger didn't even write anything down, just gave me this tired look and said, "You're not the first." I asked what that meant, but he just shrugged. Said sometimes people come out of the woods, looking official, and it's better not to engage. I left without pressing the issue. I don't know if he didn't believe me, or if he knew something and didn't want to say it out loud. Either way, I got out of there, and haven't gone back to that region since. I still have the wrench next to my bed. I still wake up at 4:12 a.m. sometimes, for no reason at all. Every time I hear a car pull into the lot behind my apartment, I check the peephole, just in case. I know how insane it sounds, but I'll never forget the way he looked at that door, like he already knew what was inside, and that if I hadn't locked it, if I hadn't installed those lights, he would have come in without hesitation. Not to steal, not to talk, just to be there, standing over me, watching. Story 9. We never really got over what happened to Lucas. That trip a year ago was supposed to be a celebration, graduation, new jobs, one last adventure before adult life fully kicked in. We went RV camping up in the Adirondacks. Remote but not unreachable. Third night in, Lucas went to pee in the woods and never came back. Search teams spent 5 days combing the area. No tracks, no scent, no clues. It was like the forest swallowed him whole. After that, we all kind of drifted apart. Nobody said it, but I think we all felt responsible in some way. This year, for some reason none of us could explain, we decided to go back. We kept telling ourselves it was for closure, maybe to prove there was a logical explanation. Maybe, just to show we weren't afraid. There were 4 of us this time. Me, Aaron, Marco, and Ty. We picked the same spot, parked in the same patch of dirt, even brought the same RV. But this time, we came prepared. Marco set up a GoPro inside, mounted up in the corner of the ceiling, hidden behind a small speaker. It recorded all night, full battery, wide angle, just in case. None of us admitted we expected to catch anything, but deep down, I think we hoped we would. The first 2 nights were uneventful, quiet, normal. We sat around the fire, drank a little, shared stories, but the vibe was off. Erin kept checking over her shoulder, and I noticed Ty barely slept. On the 3rd night, the same night Lucas disappeared the year before, we turned in early. Everyone was tense, like we all knew something was coming but didn't want to be the first to say it. We locked every door and window, made sure the camera was running, and went to sleep. I woke up around 4 a.m. in a cold sweat. No sound, no dream, just this deep sense of dread. I checked the RV, everyone was still there. I went back to bed. The next morning, Marco pulled the SD card and started reviewing the footage. I stood behind him at the little dinette table, coffee in hand, just watching the screen over his shoulder. Most of it was just us sleeping, the quiet creaks of the RV shifting with the wind. Then at 3:46 a.m., the door opened. It wasn't loud, just a soft click, and it swung inward about a foot. The camera caught the shape of someone stepping in. No flashlight, no sound, just movement. They stood at the edge of the frame. We couldn't see their face, just the outline of a body. Still, barely breathing, just watching. We all gathered around the screen. No one spoke. The figure didn't move, just stood there in the dark staring at us while we slept. 1 minute, maybe more. You could see our sleeping bags rise and fall with each breath, totally unaware. At one point, it tilted its head slightly, like it was curious. Then just as quietly, it stepped back and the door closed behind it. No sound, no reaction from any of us. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. It had been there for 58 seconds. None of us had heard a thing. We replayed that moment over and over, hoping we'd see a face, some clue. But the shadows never gave us more than that vague shape. Tall, thin, hands down by its sides. Ty got up and walked outside, pale as hell. Erin started crying. Marco just sat there, still staring at the UE screen. I don't know how we didn't notice it, how we didn't feel it. The idea that something or someone came in, stood over us and left without leaving a trace is something I still can't process. We searched around the RV afterward. No prints, no marks. The door latch wasn't damaged, it wasn't even really unlocked. It was like it had been opened with a key, or with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly how. We left an hour later. No discussion. Just packed up and left. Haven't spoken to Marco or Ty since that trip. Erin blocked all of us the day after we got home. I still have a copy of the video. I don't watch it anymore. Not because I'm afraid of what I'll see, but because I'm afraid it might show something new. Something I didn't notice the first time. Like maybe the figure looked at me just a little longer. Or maybe there was more than one. Or maybe it never really left. That door still haunts me. Not because it opened, but because of how calmly it did. Whoever that was didn't rush, didn't hesitate. They knew we'd be asleep, they knew where the camera was, and they knew we wouldn't wake up. That kind of certainty only comes from practice, from routine, which means it probably wasn't the first time they did it.